The 277 Furry. Is it the game changer of cartridges for the 21st century warfighter? Or is it a flash in the pan, doomed to obscurity? Well, let's dive into that today on Gunfighter Life, the podcast where we talk about gunfighting the right way, with God at the center, Judeo-Christian values, and real-world first-hand experience. I'm going to put in a quick bio so you know that I have some street cred in the areas we're going to talk about today. Different aspects of this cartridge may be called upon for warfighting, gunfighting, defense, hunting. So I'm going to put in the bio, and then we'll get into the main topic. Bio. First and foremost, I am a Christian. That is number one in my life, serving God, following Jesus. Combat veteran, served in the United States Marine Corps and the Army. Also law enforcement veteran, private contractor, state rifle and pistol champion. Professional big game hunter and guide. If you feel called to support, check out Patreon. There should be a link in the show notes. With that, I am your host, Michael Melito, and I am blessed to serve you today. Now on the 277 Furry. What is it? As best as I understand it. It is a short action cartridge, meaning it's basically the same or similar overall length to the 308 6.5 Creedmoor, that short action length that has come to dominate modern shooting for a majority of applications. Not all, but the majority. Now talking about those two cartridges, the 6.5 Creedmoor is actually around .260 if you did it in inches. Caliper, if you don't know, caliber is just a measurement in inches, point whatever inches. 50 caliber, .50 is 1/2 of an inch. .25 caliber is 1/4 of an inch. .25. So if we look at the 6.5 millimeters, the most common, the 6.5 Creedmoor, that's .260. If we look at 30 cal, or the metric designation, the NATO designation, the 7.62. You might denote from the really cool name of the 277 Furry that it lies somewhere in the middle, .277, which if you're into hunting, that's been a popular caliber for a long time in the 270 Winchester. Same caliber. 270 Winchester, .277 if you want to be precise. It's just named the 270. But .277. So what makes this round furious? What is different about this round? Well, the 270, if you're familiar, is a 30-03, but for most people easier to understand, a 30-06 necked down to .277 caliber, and you get the 270. It's a good cartridge. Been putting animals in the dirt for a long time. But 30-06 being a long action, we discussed predominantly today, is a short action. So the 277 Furry is made to put in a short action. Also, talking about Furry, the 30-06 has a SAMI spec of 60,000 psi, pounds per square inch. The 270 bumps that up to 65,000 psi. But hold your horses. The 277 Furry, 80,000 psi. Therein lies the potential, at least, for Furry. 80,000 psi, that's quite a big step up from 60,000 psi. And you might be saying, well, why don't we just take something like a 308 or a 6.5 Creedmoor and push that to 80,000 psi? Well, you run into some mechanical problems when you do that. Anybody that's reloaded and gone too high in the pressure knows you start getting very clear pressure signs. You're getting flattened and then maybe ruptured primers with all that nasty gas going where it shouldn't. You may even get a catastrophic failure of the brass case itself. It may not be able to support that 80,000 psi and really rupture and maybe cause damage to the firearm, maybe injury to the shooter, both of which are bad. Shouldn't have to explain that. So it's really not safe to push the traditional cartridges to 80,000 psi. So how does the 277 Furry do it? Well, the 277 Furry does it with some newer technology. It uses two different case materials, the majority of which is still your traditional brass, which has a lot of advantages. We've used it for a long time for this reason, because it has so many advantages. But it has trouble withstanding those much higher pressures. Steel does a better job. So the back part of the case, where you would think of the rim and the primer, is housed in the back part of the case, the part away from the bullet. They made that steel, and they've joined, amalgamated, whatever the correct vernacular is, they join those together, and I'm not even sure how they do it. But they have two different case materials, steel and then brass. That steel can withstand those higher pressures. And if you've dealt with this in real life, you'll know that brass often ruptures back towards the rim, towards the primer pocket area. So if this pans out in real world physics, in Newtonian physics, if it can hold this pressure, I go back to the previous statement in the beginning. Is it a game changer? Well, maybe. Maybe it is. The obvious correlation there is if you can get more pressure, that should give you more velocity. Now, a lot of that is what I know, but to give credit where credit is due, I am going to be looking at the Wikipedia page. And if I have another source, I will quote that too. It's too new to be in any of the reloading manuals that I have. But that is the big thing, in my opinion, that makes this cartridge potentially a game changer and different. Because, again, .277 diameter bullets are nothing new. You've got the 270 is by far the most popular. You also have the 270 WSM Winchester short mag, and you have the 6.8 Western, all of which are .277. Oh, and the 6.8 SPC, a good cartridge for the smaller frame AR platform. The more traditional AR-15 platform, I should say. All of which are cartridges in this bullet diameter. So the bullet diameter itself is not really anything new. But that case design and that 80,000 PSI really is kind of new. And in reading the Wikipedia, I just learned something. It does have a steel base on some of the cases and a brass majority of the case. But it says here that it has an aluminum locking washer, which I was not aware of. I guess when I was saying I didn't know how they did that, I still don't know how they do it, but apparently they use some aluminum in there to lock those two together. Seems like a pretty complex process, which we'll get to in the flash in the pan part of this episode. But let's stick with the 80,000 PSI. Now let's look at some numbers. Let's look at some foot-pounds, some velocities, some grain weights. We've got 3 loadings listed here. 135 grain at 3,000 feet a second. 135 grain at 2750, less impressive, and 140 grain at 2950. And you might be saying, if you know a lot about ballistics, well, that's not that impressive. I mean, the old classic kind of number that sticks out in my head, at least, for the 308 Winchester is 150 grain at 2800. So, really doesn't seem that impressive. However, there's even a note at the bottom of the table here, test barrel 16 inches. You can absolutely get more powerful rounds and more impressive results. The problem is if you go with bigger rounds, you get less magazine capacity if you're talking about a war fighting gun. If you're talking about a hunting gun, not that big a deal. But they're also getting these velocities from a 16-inch barrel. Usually if you're looking at velocities like that, you're looking at a 20, 22, 24, 26-inch barrel sometimes. This is doing that out of a 16-inch barrel. And a lot of modern warfare, because most people live in cities, is CQB. And in that type of environment, the shorter barrels really come in handy. You'll see a big switch in the past several decades from the Army using M16s, which is a 20-inch barrel, to the M4, which is a 14 5-inch barrel. So there is something to be said for a short, handy gun. And if you can get those respectable velocities out of a 16-inch barrel with that 80,000 psi, that's pretty cool. I have to imagine those velocities would only get more impressive in a more traditional barrel length, let's say a 20 or a 22, 24-inch barrel. Getting into some of the background of this, if you don't know, designed by Sig Sauer, seems like they're everywhere now, got their hands in all kind of things, making suppressors, winning military contracts for handguns, for rifles. And I was going to wait to talk about this. I've been trying to not talk about it, so I'm going to skip over the weapon it's designed for. We'll talk about it. But at first I want to discuss pros and cons. Apparently announced by Sig in 2019, so it's still a very new cartridge. I also should mention that that is with that new metal case. Not all the ammunition for the 277 Fury is using that joint technology case with the steel and the aluminum and the brass. Some of it's just straight brass case, in which case it is not loaded to such high velocities. It is loaded to more traditional velocities. And from Wikipedia, it's saying that with those rounds, it's virtually identical to the commonly available 7mm 08, which was developed in 1980. The bullet diameter is close to that of the 7mm 08 Remington, and this is reading from Wikipedia. The difference in diameter is 0.006 inches, 0.15 millimeters, or approximately the thickness of 2 human hairs. The muzzle velocity and downrange energy of the reduced power 277 Fury without stainless steel case head and 7mm 08 Remington are also practically identical and similarly weighted bullets with similar ballistic coefficients. That's reading from Wikipedia. I'm sure with hand loading you can tweak different things, you always can. But that just goes to show you that basically if you're dealing with brass case ammunition to traditional velocity, there's really nothing revolutionary about this cartridge. It's only when you get to that conjoined case that you start seeing the advantages of loading this thing up quite a bit hotter. Which is a good transition into, is it a flash in the pan? We talked about some pretty unique technology, and hats off to Sig for making this work, if it, in fact, it does work, and it seems to work. So hats off to them for that. Give credit where credit is due. But there's a lot of new technology going in there. Again, I don't even know how these cases are amalgamated, vulcanized, conjoined, whatever technology to get these to go together with a aluminum washer and steel and brass. But there's some new techniques and technology going into that. With that, generally, comes higher cost. When this actually becomes readily available, what's the cost going to be on that? You would have to think that if they're making this case with all those different steps, it would logically seem that it would cost more, and I don't know what it's going to cost, but it seems like logically it would cost more than a simple brass case that we've made for over 100 years. Looking at the Sig Sauer website, it lists Elite Bonded Polymer Tip 277 Fury Hybrid, 150 grain for $80 a box. That's $80 a box for 20 rounds. Now, if the U.S. government is paying for that and you're a warfighter, that's pretty cool. But if you're a hunter, is that juice worth the squeeze? It does get some pretty respectable velocities out of a 16-inch barrel. But I don't honestly know. I can't find what this round will do out of a 24-inch barrel, a more traditional hunting rifle length. I don't know. Maybe you do get a lot more velocity. But even so, in a hunting rifle, you could move up to a magnum action. And if you look at something like a very common 7mm Rem Mag that you can buy over the counter at Walmart. Now, I went to Midway USA. They're not a sponsor. I don't take bribes. It's just they're a good company that I use quite a bit. And there's plenty of 7mm Remington Magnum listed for in the $40-ish range. Now, as we talked about in that wiki article, the 7mm .280 is pretty close to .277, and comparing the 140 grain bullet weight, which is pretty comparable to the grain weights we just listed. And that lists the velocity on their website, I assume from the manufacturer, of 3175. So that's faster. Granted, that's almost certainly out of a longer barrel. But is that worth it to you? All that added complexity and added cost to have a slower round, even if it is out of quite a bit shorter barrel? For the majority of hunters, I'm going to say it's probably not worth it. For some hunters, they'll say absolutely. I want to put a can on it. I don't want it to be crazy long. I want a short barrel. So there will be that subsection to say absolutely it's worth it. And I'd say, hey, good for you. I'm glad you have an option to do that now. Will it be enough to support the market? I don't know. What about the tactical shooter? Well, I don't know how much practicing and shooting courses you're going to be taking. Again, if the government is not paying the bill, if you're buying the ammo for $80 a box, and granted that's new, the price hopefully will come down if this cartridge sticks around. But $80 a box, that's pretty spendy, and who knows, with inflation, that cost may double or triple. Now they do offer the cheaper brass case, just regular brass case ammo. However, the two different ammunitions are going to have different points of aim, points of impact. So it's not like you can shoot the one, I don't think, unless they get some kind of crazy physics workaround, like a lightweight bullet in brass and then a heavier weight bullet. But that wouldn't even work because of ballistics coefficients, I don't think. But so you're going to have two different point of aim, point of impacts, which means you can't just train with one and shoot the other. You're going to have to re-zero your gun every time. And are you really going to, let's be honest, are you really going to go out and train with one type of ammo and then every time re-zero your gun for the other kind of ammo? That seems a little impractical. So those are some downsides. That's where it might be a flash in the pan. Not to mention if the technology doesn't end up working out. Also, another big one would be barrel life. If you up those PSI, all other things being equal, the same barrel material, barrel finishes, bore diameter, all those things with that higher PSI, I have to imagine it's going to greatly reduce barrel life. For the hunter, maybe not a big deal. For the average avid shooter, tactical shooter, competitive shooter, people that go to training classes, that absolutely may be a factor. So there's no free lunch. You up that PSI, you're going to degrade that barrel life. So these are reasons why I think it might be a flash in the pan. Well, what does that depend on? Let me be clear. I'm not a prophet. I don't see the future. I don't know what the future holds. I don't know when Jesus is going to return. Nobody knows the day or the hour. And I don't know what's going to happen with this cartridge. Now, I think really likely its fate will be intertwined with the Army's service rifle, the M5. And I've been waiting till now to discuss this, but I think the fate of this cartridge may be intertwined with this because historically, cartridges that the militaries adopt do well. Think about the most popular cartridges in America today. There's only a few exceptions, but in general, if the military use them, they're really popular. 30-06, 308, 5.56, 7.62 by 51 or 308, 9mm 45 ACP. Not all, but the vast majority of popular cartridges had military adoption. Going back to the wiki background, cartridge was designed by Sig Sauer for the United States Army's Next Generation Squad Weapon Program. It is dimensionally similar to the 7.62 by 51 NATO service cartridge. Click on that little link in the wiki here. 2017, replace the 5.56 M4 carbine and the 249 SAW light machine gun and the 7.62, which would be the 308, I'm interjecting there, M240 machine gun with a common system of 6.8mm cartridges, and to develop small arms fire control system for the new weapons. It was the XM5 and then the M5, and I think they had to change it to the M7 is where it stands now. You have to look into that for yourself. I'm not really sure, but for some reason they changed it from the M5 to the M7. And this cartridge, the 277, is part of that. Not that the cartridge can't exist independently from this. I think it is also chambered in the Sig Cross rifle. But I think whether it's going to be a wild success again or a flash in the pan largely depends on the success of this weapon. Now, it has been accepted as the replacement for the M4. And I thought it would be all over the place, and it was for a little while, and then it kind of went away. Which, I don't know what to read into that or not. Here's what concerns me about that. It talked about replacing a bunch of these weapons with this M5 or M7, whatever they decide to name it. Historically, the majority of the time when that is tried, that does not work out. You know, they try and do one weapon that's a PDW and one that's your general issue rifle and one that's a squad automatic weapon. You know, that was tried with the M14. Very short-lived service rifle. And that's not the only time. If you look throughout history, I'm not the guy for that. Go check out Ian at Forgotten Weapons. He does a really good job on that kind of stuff. But let's just say this is not the first time it's been tried. I think the majority of the time it's been tried, it has not worked. Guns are like tools. What makes a good squad automatic gun does not necessarily make a good infantry rifle. And what makes a good infantry rifle does not necessarily correlate to a really good PDW. So that gives me some cause for concern there. Doesn't mean it won't work. It's just some cause for concern. What I like about it, I have thought for a long time that, and this is coming from somebody that served and went to war twice with this cartridge, that the 5.56 by 45 is less than stellar in terminal performance. I think we should have had a more powerful cartridge. So that gives me hope on this. On the other side of that, I would not have chose a 277 Fury. I have a other podcast that should be coming out or may come out by the time you listen to this. Either way, make sure you're subscribed to the podcast so you get it. Talking about what I would have chosen for the new rifle and the new cartridge for the U.S. military. If they asked me, if they appointed me as the head of some kind of committee or commission to run tests and evaluations on the new service rifle and cartridge. So there's a whole episode on that already recorded. Again, may come out before or after this. Make sure you're subscribed. And on that note, don't forget to leave a review. Scroll down, hit some stars if you would, if you can, on whatever app you're listening to. And if you want to become a patron, we discuss all kinds of stuff, really important theological stuff, God and the important stuff. And we also discuss guns and gun chat and cartridges on there as well. So if you want to be part of that insider chat, that's just one of the perks of being a patron. There's Patreon-only content. In fact, I just did a short video discussing current truck guns and kind of my layout for my truck guns and tools and things like that I put out today, just because it's fresh. So I'd be a bad capitalist to not mention that. If you want to support the podcast, there should be a Patreon link in the show notes. Back to the topic. So I wouldn't have chose this cartridge. I think this is going a little bit too far in the spectrum. I think this is kind of close to the 7.62 by 51 NATO, which is a fantastic cartridge. I'm not saying it's a bad one. It's a great cartridge. It's perhaps, in my opinion, the best, most well-balanced cartridge for a rifle, period. For hunting, for defense, for all kinds of things. It's a great full-power rifle round. But that's the issue. It's a full-power rifle round. We already went away from full-powered rifle rounds. We've been down that road. We got away from that. Right? The intermediate cartridge became a thing pretty shortly after, and in World War II, you saw a lot of mass issue going away from full-powered rifles, like the Mosin Nagant, to the submachine gun and intermediate rounds like the PPSH. The Germans going from basing their tactics on rifles to basing their tactics on machine guns and SG-44s and all that stuff, because they were massively effective. Those intermediate rounds, the 7 Kurtz, the Tokarov rounds, those kind of rounds. And then, the whole I'm kind of getting off on a tangent, but the 7.62 by 39, a phenomenal intermediate cartridge. The 5.56, an okay intermediate cartridge in my opinion. We went to those for a reason, and now we're kind of going back to a full-powered rifle round. And I think a lot of that is Afghanistan. And I went to war twice, let me be clear. I went to Iraq. I fought in Iraq. Maybe that skews my view. I did not go to Afghanistan, but I do know that there were some long engagements in Afghanistan. And there was probably the right belief that a more powerful cartridge would have done well there. But I think if you look at the majority of armed conflicts with infantry since World War I, most of the conflicts are at far shorter distances than that. We look going into World War I, most of the rifles were regulated out to 1,000 yards or more. And they quickly realized that modern combat generally happens closer than that. Vietnam, most other conflicts we've been in, the Cold War conflicts, and we had this outlier, and now they're jumping back to the full power cartridge. Will that be a wise choice? I don't know. I don't know if they're going to stick with this. When I look at that weapon, it weighs something like 9 pounds. That's a pretty heavy weapon. So again, I don't know whether it's going to succeed or fail or not. I'm just throwing out some concerns, things I like, things I don't like. On a positive note, something I really do like, they're finally getting away from the direct impingement system, which I know technically the M16 M4 is not direct impingement, it's a gas piston, but everybody calls it a DI system, so that's what we colloquially know it as. I don't like that system, never has. If my M16 failed during the war, catastrophic failure, meaning it wasn't like a double feed or triple feed, like it could not be fixed. Again, maybe my own biases play into that, but I've never been a big fan of direct impingement. It does have some advantages. I think CONUS, for police operations in the U.S. where you can maintain a gun pretty well, it's a decent system. But for war fighting in adverse conditions, I've been less than impressed with it. The M5, M7 is a piston system, a short stroke piston system, and I think that's a superior system. As much refinement as we've done and as good as we've gotten with the M4, I think the short stroke gas piston is a better system, and a lot of people will disagree with that. I'm just telling you, I think that's a step in the right direction. I don't know which one of these factors or a combination of factors will either cause this to go forward or be retracted or abandoned. Maybe it's none of these. Maybe it's price. And I'll be honest, I don't think that price of all the money we spend in defense and social programs and things like that, not to get political, but of all the money we spend, look at what an aircraft carrier costs or one new experimental jet fighter costs. I don't think that what our infantrymen carry in their hands, their rifle, should be a place to cut costs. But it may rise or fall on the basis of cost, who knows? But I think the fate of the 277 Fury may be closely linked with if it's a phenomenal success, and this is what the military is going to use for the foreseeable future, if it gets mass adoption, Army, Navy, Air Force, U.S. Marine Corps, then I would say the 277 Fury probably has a bright future because people want what the military has. Historically, those cartridges work pretty well. If it gets abandoned fairly quickly, it may go the route of a same diameter cartridge, the 6.8 SPC, which is a good cartridge. It's not gone, but it's certainly not dominating the market, the 6.8 SPC. If you don't know, that's the same diameter bullet, that 277, that fits into a just regular M4, M16 size rifle. So, again, I don't know which way this cartridge is going to go, but hopefully I've laid out kind of what this cartridge is, why it exists, what the merits of it are. And I should mention, I talked about that barrel life. One of the things, just in closing, I think it will be neglectful not to mention this. The military in adoption of this rifle is also adopting this kind of new technology, not only in the case, but also in the optic they're going to put on the rifle. And I mentioned the two different ammunitions. So the barrel life also affects the military too. Some of the military shoots quite a bit. So as far as I understand it, there is a plan to shoot this regular brass case, traditional low pressure ammunition And then when the fight is on, literally, like we go to war, we issue this hotter ammunition. And maybe the optic, since it's like a smart optic, you can just switch different types of ammo. I don't know how big of a logistical hurdle that may or may not be. I don't know. That's going to be a problem with soldiers in the field trying to figure out which ammunition they have and if it's on the right setting, because the most terminally effective and powerful cartridge in the world doesn't do you much good if you can't hit the target you're shooting at because the bullet doesn't shoot where you're aiming. And maybe this new optic has a way to defeat that, or maybe they're just going to re-zero the rifle when they get in country with the new ammo. I don't know how they're going to work that out, but that is a logistical potential issue. Also, if soldiers are used to the recoil of a lower pressure round, you can't cheat physics. If you're getting more energy out of the one end of the rifle, you're almost certainly going to get more energy back into the shooter. They may be fine and accustomed to shooting that lower pressure ammo, and then going into combat is not the time to realize you're not really ready for the rifle that you're carrying because it's different than a rifle you've been training with. Even though the rifle is the same, the cartridge fundamentally is different. Is that going to be an issue? Again, it's a potential issue. Whether it's a real issue or not, I don't know. If you had that smart optic, which I would imagine if with all the stuff it's supposed to do, they can click between different kinds of ammo. But if you, as a recreational shooter, unless you're planning on getting that same optic, how are you going to deal with that problem? Or are you just going to run the really expensive, higher pressure, going through barrels faster ammo all the time? One thing that does excite me about this round is, in general, when a new cartridge comes around, especially a fairly different cartridge parent case, here in America, we like to hot rod, or in the cartridge world, we call that wildcatting. Just did a whole episode on wildcats. You should be able to go and look that up. But it'd be really cool to see what you could do with a 30 caliber Furry, necked up to a 30 cal with 80,000 PSI for hunting application. What would that do? We're kind of in the realm of theoretical physics here, so that's kind of fun. But if you neck it down to 22 caliber or get the 22 Furry, again, pretty cool. Talking about that 7 Rem mag. What if you got a 7 Rem mag and use that same case technology with the two different metals and could load 7mm Rem mag to 80,000 PSI out of a 26-inch barrel? Maybe your shoulder would be the limiting factor there. Anyway, some cool stuff to think about. Of all the cartridges coming out, at least this one's different. At least this one's, something different. It brings something to the table other than just marketing. And again, hats off to SIG for doing that. Give credit where credit is due. With that, I think that's going to wrap up the 277 Furry. Again, don't forget to like, subscribe. If you want to be an active participant of the tribe, consider becoming a patron. We do have a Facebook Messenger chat for people that want to be a part of that, kind of the inner circle of the tribe. Also, there's Patreon-only content. And if you don't want to do any of that, but you want to support the podcast, you can go to goodshepherdtraining.com. There is a gear store there. There's stickers, some pretty cool gear on there. If you want to check that out, again, goodshepherdtraining.com. Goodshepherdtraining.com. Should be a link to both that and Patreon in the show notes. With that, the tactical tip of the day. Much like the gun this M7 M5 is replacing, it has a rotating multi-lug bolt which locks into a commonly known as a star chamber. It's a good design, an accurate design, a pain in the butt to clean design. In fact, most GIs get issued a special brush. If you're familiar at all with military and M16s, ARs, M4s, you're probably familiar with that chamber brush. It's literally designed specifically to clean that pain in the butt place in the rifle. It's kind of hard to get to. Kind of reach in there with your pinky. It's not great. If you don't have one of those specialty brushes, a couple of things you can do. Have Q-tips on hand. Q-tips are kind of a gun cleaner's friend anyway. You can take some of those. The plastic ones I think are a little bit better, and you can kind of bend those to give them an angle to clean inside there. With whatever solvent, CLP, Simple Green, Ballistol you want to use, hops number 9. Also, what you can use is a 20 gauge swab. Those work pretty well. In fact, I think they may work better than the actual chamber brush for military issues. So that's your tactical tip of the day. You might have one of those just laying around. Put that on the end of a cleaning rod, get it up in the chamber. Don't try and shove it too hard into the barrel. You're just cleaning the chamber. You're not trying to force it into the barrel. It obviously won't fit. It's 20 gauge. But should be able to use it pretty well for cleaning that star chamber. Spray some, again, solvent, CLP, maybe brake cleaner if you want on there. Clean that chamber out. That star chamber can be a pain in the butt. Now this new one is a piston system, so it shouldn't get nearly as dirty. But either way, if you have a star chamber, eventually you're probably going to want to clean it. Those 20 gauge bore brushes. This one I think does have a bigger bolt face, so maybe the M5 or the AR-10 style, you might want a 12 gauge bore brush. But just something that'll get in there in between all those teeth and those weird angles that can be quite awkward to clean. How's this for a verse of the day? What is impossible with men is possible with God. Amen to that. You have issues in life, you have problems in life, you have obstacles in your life. Yeah, I don't know you. Again, I'm not a prophet, but I know that you do, because we all do. Whatever your problem, nothing is impossible with God. What is that compared to the awesome power of God? The God who created the heavens and the earth, the sea and everything in them. The God that raises men from the dead and gives sight to the blind, who stops the sun in the sky, who turns water into wine, who sets and keeps the universe in motion, yet knows every hair on your head. Nothing's impossible to God. So whatever problem, struggle you have, I don't know, but I know where to go. I know who has the answer and the solution. Go to God. It's always the right answer to go to God. With that, men, thanks for listening and have a blessed day.